Kiyaya and I can't wait to find out when James Henry Trotter wakes up inside of that peach that he wandered into last week. Friends, we can't wait to share the next several chapters of Roald Dahl's amazing masterpiece, James and the Giant Peach. That's right, Kiyaya. It's time to sit back, relax, and get cozy, because it's story time with Kiyaya and Daniel.
Are you tired of your high cable bill?
Yes!
Then come to 2287 Route 112, Long Island Telecom, and let me put you on AT&T TV, and I will beat your cable bill. 631-833-9679, or on the web at litelecomgroup.com.
Stories are such an important part of our lives. Join my friend Kiyaya and I for Get Cozy, because it's story time with Kiyaya and Daniel, where we share some of the greatest picture books and chapters from children's and young adult literature to inspire you to keep embedding literacy into your days. Chapter 14. We're off! Someone was shouting. We're off at last! James woke up with a jump and looked about him. The creatures were all out of their hammocks and moving excitedly around the room. Suddenly the floor gave a great heave, as though an earthquake were taking place. Here we go! Shouted the old green grasshopper, hopping up and down with excitement. Hold on tight! What's happening? Cried James, leaping out of his hammock. What's going on? The ladybug, who is obviously a kind and gentle creature, came over and stood beside him. In case you don't know it, she said, we are about to depart forever from the top of this ghastly hill that we've all been living on for so long. We are about to roll away inside this great, big, beautiful peach to a land to a land of what? Asked James. Never you mind, said the ladybug. But nothing could be worse than this desolate hilltop and those repulsive aunts of yours. Hear, hear, they all shouted. Hear, hear. You may not have noticed it, the ladybug went on, but the whole garden, even before it reaches the steep edge of the hill, happens to be on a steep slope. And therefore, the only thing that has been stopping this peach from rolling away right from the beginning is the thick stem attaching it to the tree. Break the stem, and off we go! Watch it! Cried Miss Spider as the room gave another violent lurch. Here we go! Not quite, not quite. At this moment, continued the ladybug, our centipede, who has a pair of jaws as sharp as razors, is up there on the top of the peach, nibbling away at that stem. In fact, he must be nearly through it, as you can tell from the way we're lurching about. Would you like me to take you under my wing so that you won't fall over when we start rolling? That's very kind of you, said James, but I think I'll be all right. Just then, the centipede stuck his grinning face through a hole in the ceiling and shouted, I've done it! We're off! We're off! The others cried. We're off! The journey begins, shouted the centipede. And who knows where it will end, muttered the earthworm. If you have anything to do with it, it can only mean trouble. Nonsense, said the ladybug. We are about to visit the most marvelous places and see the most wonderful things. Isn't that true, centipede? There's no knowing what we shall see, cried the centipede. We may see a creature with 49 heads who lives in the desolate snow, and whenever he catches a cold, which he dreads, he has 49 noses to blow. We may see the venomous pink-spotted scrunch, who can chew up a man with one bite. It likes to eat 5 of them roasted for lunch, and 18 for its supper at night. We may see a dragon, and nobody knows that we won't see a unicorn there. We may see a terrible monster with toes growing out of the tufts of his hair. We may see the sweet little bitchy bright hens, so playful and kind and well-bred, and such beautiful eggs. You just boil them, and then they explode, and they blow off your head. A new rhinoceros surely you'll see, and that enormous and gnarable gnat whose sting when it stings you go in at the knee and comes out through the top of your hat. We may even get lost and be frozen by frost. We may die in an earthquake or tremor, or nastier still. We may even be tossed on the horns of a furious dilemma. But who cares? Let us go from this horrible hill. Let us roll. Let us bowl. Let us plunge. Let us go rolling and bowling and spinning until we're away from old Spiker and Sponge. 1 second later, slowly, insidiously, oh, most gently, the great Peach started to lean forward and steal into motion. The whole room began to tilt over, and all the furniture went sliding across the floor and crashed against the far wall. So did James, and the ladybug, and the old green grasshopper, and the spider, and the earthworm, and also the centipede, who had just come slithering quickly down the wall. Chapter 15. Outside in the garden at that very moment, Aunt Sponge and Aunt Spiker had just taken their places at the front gate, each with a bunch of tickets in her hand, and the first stream of early morning sightseers was visible in the distance, climbing up the hill to view the Peach. "We shall make a fortune today," Aunt Spiker was saying. "Just look at all those people." "I wonder what became of that horrid little boy of ours last night," Aunt Sponge said. "He never did come back in, did he?" "He probably fell down in the dark and broke his leg," Aunt Spiker said. "Or his neck, maybe," Aunt Sponge said hopefully. "Just wait till I get my hands on him," Aunt Spiker said, waving her cane. "He'll never want to stay out all night again by the time I've finished with him. Good gracious me! What's that awful noise?" Both women swung around to look. The noise, of course, had been caused by the giant Peach crashing through the fence that surrounded it, and now gathering speed. Every second, it came rolling across the garden toward the place where Aunt Sponge and Aunt Spiker were standing. They gaped, they screamed, they started to run, they panicked, they both got in each other's way, they began pushing and jostling, and each of them was thinking only about saving herself. Aunt Sponge, the fat one, tripped over a box that she'd brought along to keep the money in and fell flat on her face. Aunt Spiker immediately tripped over Aunt Sponge and came down on top of her. They both lay on the ground, fighting and clawing and yelling and struggling frantically to get up again. But before they could do this, the mighty Peach was upon them. There was a crunch, and then there was silence. The Peach rolled on, and behind it Aunt Sponge and Aunt Spiker lay ironed out upon the flat grass. Laid out upon the grass, as flat and thin and lifeless as a couple of paper dolls, cut from a picture book. Chapter 16. And now the Peach had broken out of the garden and was over the edge of the hill, rolling faster and bouncing down the steep slope at a terrific pace. Faster and faster and faster it went, and the crowds of people who were climbing up the hill suddenly caught sight of this terrible monster plunging down upon them, and they screamed and scattered to right and left as it went hurtling by. At the bottom of the hill, it charged across the road, knocking over a telegraph pole and flattening 2 parked automobiles as it went by. Then it rushed madly across about 20 fields, breaking down all the fences and hedges in its path. It went right through the middle of a herd of fine Jersey cows, and then through a flock of sheep, and then through a paddock full of horses, and then through a yard full of pigs. And soon the whole countryside was a seething mass of panic-stricken animals, stampeding in all directions. The Peach was still going on at a tremendous speed with no signs of slowing down, and about a mile farther on it came to a village. Down the main street of the village it rolled, with people leaping frantically out of its path right and left. At the end of the street, it went crashing right through the wall of an enormous building, and out the other side, leaving two gaping round holes in the brickwork. The building happened to be a famous factory where they made chocolate, and almost at once a great river of warm, melted chocolate came pouring out of the holes in the factory wall. A minute later, this brown, sticky mess was flowing through every street in the village, oozing under the doors of houses and into people's shops and gardens. Children were wading in it up to their knees, and some were even trying to swim in it. And all of them were sucking it into their mouths in great greedy gulps and shrieking with joy. But the Peach rushed on across the countryside, on and on, leaving trail of destruction in its wake. Cowsheds, stables, pigsties, barns, bungalows, hayricks. Anything that got in its way went toppling over like a ninepin. An old man sitting quietly beside a stream has had his fishing rod whisked out of his hands as it went dashing by. And a woman called Daisy Entwistle was standing so close to it as it passed that she had the skin taken off the tip of her very long nose. Would it ever stop? Why should it? A round object will always keep on rolling as long as it is on a downhill slope. And in this case, the land sloped downhill all the way until it reached the ocean. The same ocean that James had begged his aunts to be allowed to visit the day before. Well, perhaps he was going to visit it now. The Peach was rushing closer and closer to it every second, and closer also to the towering white cliffs that came first. These cliffs are the most famous in the whole of England, and they are hundreds of feet high. Below them the sea is deep and cold and hungry. Many ships have been swallowed up and lost forever on this part of the coast, and all the men who were in them as well. The Peach was now only 100 yards away from the cliff, now 50, now 20, now 10, now 5, and when it reached the edge of the cliff, it seemed to leap up into the sky and hang over it, suspended for a few seconds, still turning over and over into the air. Then it began to fall. Down, 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 smack! It hit the water with a colossal splash and sank like a stone. But a few seconds later it came again, and this time up it stayed, floating serenely upon the surface of the water. Chapter 17. At this moment, the scene inside the Peach itself was one of indescribable chaos. James Henry Trotter was lying bruised and battered on the floor of the room amongst the tangled mess of centipede and earthworm and spider and ladybug and glowworm and old green grasshopper. In the whole history of the world, no traveler had ever had a more terrible journey than these unfortunate creatures. It had started out well, with much laughing and shouting, and for the first few seconds as the Peach had begun to roll slowly forward, nobody had minded being tumbled about a little bit. And when it went bump, and the centipede had shouted, "That was Aunt Sponge!" and then bump again, "That was Aunt Spiker!" there had been a tremendous burst of cheering all around. But as soon as the Peach rolled out of the garden and began to go down the steep hill, rushing and plunging and bounding madly downward, then the whole thing became a nightmare. James found himself being flung up against the ceiling, then back onto the floor, then sideways against the wall, then up onto the ceiling again, and up and down and back and forth and round, and at the same time all the other creatures were flying through the air and in every direction, and so were the chairs and the sofa, and not to mention the 42 boots belonging to the centipede. Everything in all of them were being rattled around like peas inside an enormous rattle that was being rattled by a mad giant who refused to stop. To make it worse, something went wrong with the glowworm's lighting system, and the room was in pitchy darkness. There were screams and yells and curses and cries of pain, and everything kept going round and round. And once James made a frantic grab at some thick bars sticking from the wall, only to find out that they were a couple of the centipede's legs. "Let go, you idiot!" shouted the centipede, kicking himself free, and James was promptly flung across the room into the old green grasshopper's horny lap. Twice he got tangled up in Miss Spider's legs, a horrible business, and toward the end, the poor earthworm, who was cracking himself like a whip every time he flew through the air, from one side of the room to the other, coiled himself around James's body in a panic and refused to unwind. Oh, it was a frantic and terrible trip. But it was all over now, and the room was suddenly very still and quiet. Everybody was beginning slowly and painfully to disentangle himself from everybody else. "Let's have some light!" shouted the centipede. "Yes," they cried, "light! Give us some light!" "I'm trying," answered the poor glowworm. "I'm doing my best. Please be patient." They all waited in silence. Then a faint greenish light began to glimmer out of the glowworm's tail, and this gradually became stronger and stronger until it was, anyway, enough to see by. "Some great journey," the centipede said, limping across the room. "I shall never be the same again," murmured the earthworm. "Nor I," the ladybug said. "It has taken years off my life. But, my dear friends," cried the old green grasshopper, trying to be cheerful, "we are there!" "Where?" they asked. "Where? Where is there?" "I don't know," the old green grasshopper said, "but I'll bet it's somewhere good." "We are probably at the bottom of a coal mine," the earthworm said gloomily. "We certainly went down and down and down very suddenly at the last moment. I felt it in my stomach. I still feel it." "Perhaps we are in the middle of some beautiful country full of songs and music," the old green grasshopper said. "Or near the seashore," said James eagerly, "with lots of other children down in the sand for me to play with." "Pardon me," murmured the ladybug, turning a trifle pale, "but I am wrong in thinking that we seem to be bobbing up and down." "Bobbing up and down?" they cried. "What on earth do you mean?" "You're still giddy from the journey," the old green grasshopper told her. "You'll get over it in a minute. Is everybody ready to go upstairs now and take a look around?" "Yes, yes," they chorused. "Come on, let's go!" "I refuse to show myself out of doors in my bare feet," the centipede said. "I have to get my boots on again first." "For heaven's sake, let's not go through all that nonsense again," the earthworm said. "Let's all lend the centipede a hand and get it over with," the ladybug said. "Come on." So they did, all except Miss Spider, who set about weaving a long rope ladder that would reach from the floor up to a hole in the ceiling. The old green grasshopper had wisely said that they must not risk going out of the side entrance when they did not know where they were, but must first of all go up onto the top of the peach and have a look around. So half an hour later, when the rope ladder had been finished and hung, and the 42nd boot had been laced neatly onto the centipede's 42nd foot, they were all ready to go out amidst mounting excitement and shouts of "Here we go, boys, the promised land! I can't wait to see it!" The whole company climbed up the ladder one by one and disappeared into a dark, soggy tunnel in the ceiling that went steeply, almost vertically, upward. Chapter 18. A minute later, they were out in the open, standing on the very top of the peach near the stem, blinking their eyes in the strong sunlight and peering nervously around. What happened? Where are we? But this is impossible! Unbelievable! Terrible! I told you we were bobbing up and down, the ladybug said. We are in the middle of the sea, cried James. And indeed they were. A strong current and a high wind had carried the peach so quickly away from the shore that the land was out of sight. All around them was the vast black ocean, deep and hungry. Little waves were bibbling against the sides of the peach. But how did it happen? They cried. Where are the fields? Where are the woods? Where is England? Nobody, not even James, could understand how in the world a thing like this could have come about. Ladies and gentlemen, the old green grasshopper said, trying very hard to keep the fear and disappointment out of his voice, I am afraid that we find ourselves in a rather awkward situation. Awkward? Cried the earthworm. My dear old green grasshopper, we are finished. Every one of us is about to perish. I may be blind, you know, but that much I can see quite clearly. Off with my boots, shouted the centipede. I cannot swim with my boots on. I can't swim at all, cried the ladybug. Nor can I, wailed the glowworm. Nor I, said Miss Spider. None of us three girls can swim a single stroke. But you won't have to swim, said James calmly. We are floating beautifully, and sooner or later a ship is bound to come along and pick us up. They all stared at him in amazement. Are you quite sure that we're not sinking? The ladybug asked. Of course I'm sure, answered James. Go and look for yourselves. They all ran over to the side of the peach and peered down at the water below. The boy is quite right, the old green grasshopper said. We are floating beautifully. Now we must all sit down and keep perfectly calm. Everything will be all right in the end. What absolute nonsense, cried the earthworm. Nothing is ever all right in the end, and well you know it. Poor earthworm, the ladybug said, whispering in James's ear. He loves to make everything into a disaster. He hates to be happy. He is only happy when he is gloomy. Now, isn't that odd? But then I suppose just being an earthworm is enough to make a person pretty gloomy, don't you agree? If this peach is not going to sink, the earthworm was saying, and if we are not going to be drowned, then every one of us is going to starve to death. Do you realize that we haven't had a thing to eat since yesterday morning? By golly, he's right, cried the centipede. For once, Earthworm is right. Of course I'm right, the earthworm said, and we're not likely to find anything around here either. We shall get thinner and thinner and thirstier and thirstier. And we shall all die a slow and grisly death from starvation. I am dying already. I am slowly shriveling up for want of food. Personally, I would rather drown. But good heavens, you must be blind, said James. You know very well that I'm blind, snapped the earthworm. There's no need to rub it in. I didn't mean that, said James quickly. I'm sorry, but can't you see that? See? Shouted the earthworm. How can I see if I am blind? James took a deep, slow breath. Can't you realize, he said patiently, that we have enough food here to last us for weeks and weeks? Where? They said, where? Why, the peach, of course. Our whole ship is made of food. Jumping Jehoshaphat, they cried. We never thought of that. My dear James, said the old green grasshopper, laying a front leg affectionately on James's shoulder, I don't know what we'd do without you. You are so clever. Ladies and gentlemen, we're saved again. We are most certainly not, said the earthworm. You must be crazy. You can't eat the ship. It's the only thing that's keeping us up. We shall starve if we don't, cried the centipede. And we shall drown if we do, yelled the earthworm. Oh dear, said the old green grasshopper. Now we're worse off than before. Couldn't we just eat a little bit of it? Asked Miss Spider. I am so dreadfully hungry. You can eat all you want, James answered. It would take us weeks and weeks to make any sort of a dent in this enormous peach. Surely you can see that. Good heavens, he's right again, cried the old green grasshopper, clapping his hands. It would take weeks and weeks, of course it would. But let's not go making a lot of holes all over the deck. I think we'd better simply scoop it out of that tunnel over there, the one we just came up by. An excellent idea, said the ladybug. What are you looking so worried about, earthworm? The centipede asked. What's the problem? The problem is, the earthworm said. The problem is that there is no problem. Everyone burst out laughing. Cheer up, earthworm, they said. Come and eat. And they all went over to the tunnel entrance and began scooping out great chunks of juicy, golden peach flesh. Oh, marvelous, said the centipede, stuffing it into his mouth. Delicious, said the old green grasshopper. Just fabulous, said the old glowworm. Oh my, said the ladybug primly. What a heavenly taste. She looked up at James and she smiled, and James smiled back. They sat down on the deck together, both of them chewing happily. You know, James, the ladybug said, up until this moment, I've never in my life tasted anything except those tiny little green flies that live on rose bushes. They have a perfectly delightful flavor, but this peach is even better. Isn't it glorious? Miss Spider said, coming over to join them. Personally, I had always thought that a big, juicy, caught-in-the-web bluebottle was the finest dinner in the world, until I tasted this. What a flavor, the centipede cried. It's terrific. There's nothing like it. There never has been. And I should know because I have personally tasted all the finest foods in the world. Whereupon the centipede, with his mouth full of peach, and with juice running down all over his chin, suddenly burst into song. I've eaten many strange and scrumptious dishes in my time, like jellied gnats and dandy tracks and earwigs cooked in slime. And mice with rice, they are really nice when roasted in their prime. But don't forget to sprinkle them with just a pinch of grime. I've eaten fresh mud burgers by the greatest cooks there are, and scrambled dregs and stink bugs' eggs and hornet stew in tar. And pails of snails and lizards' tails and beetles by the jar, and a beetle is improved by just a splash of vinegar. I often eat boiled slobbages, they're grand when served beside minced doodlebugs and curried slugs, and have you ever tried mosquitoes' toes and wampfish roes, most delicately fried? The only trouble is they disagree with my inside. I'm mad for crispy wasp stings on a piece of buttered toast and pickled spines of porcupines, and then a gorgeous roast of dragon's flesh well hung, not fresh. It costs a bucket most, and comes to you in barrels if you order it by the post. I crave the tasty tentacles of octopi for tea. I like hot dogs, I love hot frogs, and surely you'll agree, a plate of soil with engine's oil, a super recipe. I hardly need to mention that it's practically free. For dinner on my birthday, shall I tell you what I chose? Hot noodles made from poodles on a slice of garden hose, and rather smelly jelly made of armadillo's toes. The jelly is delicious, but you have to hold your nose. Now comes the centipede declared, the burden of my speech. These foods are rare beyond compare, some are right out of reach. But there's no doubt I'd go without 1,000,000 plates of each. For one small mite, one tiny bite of this fantastic peach. Everybody was feeling happy now. The sun was shining brightly out of a soft blue sky, and the day was calm. The giant peach with the sunlight glinting on its side was like a massive golden ball, sailing upon a silver sea. Chapter 19. "Look!" cried the centipede just as they were finishing their meal. "Look at that funny thin black thing gliding through the water over there." They all swung around to look. "There are 2 of them," said Miss Spider. "There are lots of them," said the ladybug. "What are they?" asked the earthworm, getting worried. "They must be some kind of fish," said the old green grasshopper. "Perhaps they've come along to say hello." "They are sharks!" cried the earthworm. "I'll bet anything you like. I'll bet you anything you like that they are sharks, and they have come along to eat us up." "What absolute rot," the centipede said, but his voice seemed suddenly to become a little bit shaky, and he wasn't laughing. "I am positive they are sharks," said the earthworm. "I just know they are sharks." And so, in actual fact, so did everybody else, but they were too frightened to admit it. There was a short silence. They all peered down anxiously at the sharks, who were cruising slowly round and round the peach. "Just assuming that they are sharks," the centipede said, "there still can't be any possible danger if we stay up here." But even as he spoke, one of those thin black fins suddenly changed direction and came cutting swiftly through the water, right up to the side of the peach itself. The shark paused and stared up at the company with small, evil eyes. "Go away!" they shouted. "Go away, you filthy beast!" Slowly, almost lazily, the shark opened his mouth, which was big enough to have swallowed a perambulator, and made a lunge at the peach. They all watched aghast. And now, as though at a signal from the leader, all the other sharks came swimming in toward the peach, and they clustered around it and began to attack it furiously. There must have been 20 or 30 of them at least, all pushing and fighting and lashing their tails and churning the water into a froth. Panic and pandemonium broke out immediately on the top of the peach. "Oh, we are finished now," cried Miss Spider, wriggling her feet. "They will eat up the whole peach, and then there'll be nothing else for us to stand on. Then they'll start on us." "She is right," shouted the ladybug. "We are lost forever." "Oh, I don't want to be eaten," wailed the earthworm. "But they will take me first of all, because I am so fat and juicy, and I have no bones." "Is there nothing we can do?" asked the ladybug, appealing to James. "Surely you can think of a way out of this." Suddenly, they were all looking at James. "Think," begged Miss Spider. "Think, James, think!" "Come on," said the centipede. "Come on, James, there must be something we can do." Their eyes waited upon him, tense, anxious, pathetically hopeful. I know, Kiyaya. It's another great cliffhanger. And we're just going to have to wait, friends, until next week to find out what James thinks of to save his friends and the peach from that large school of sharks who are attacking it. And I have to admit, as many times as I've read this book, Roald Dahl has always been a favorite. The imagery that's included, and even though there are some pencil illustrations in the book that we're not sharing with you, we'd like you to take part in the favorite part of our show. That's right. Let's get crafty. What images are you thinking about drawing from this installment of James and the Giant Peach? Maybe it's the peach rolling through the English countryside and smashing into that chocolate factory. Maybe it's the climbing through the top of the peach to look over the side. Friends, what part of the story has captured your mind? Share your art with us on our social media. At Stitching Wolf on Facebook and Instagram, or send your pictures to us through email. Get cozy at STITCHINGwolfDesigns.com. And Kiyaya loves getting fan mail, and he'd love to know what you're thinking about James and the Giant Peach. Please post your messages on our social media or send them to us through email too. Kiyaya loves hearing from all of you. So do I. But until we meet again, stay safe and healthy, and always remember, that's right, Kiyaya, reading is power.